Fear not, chuckleheads. Together we're going to face the future, the light that is our destiny. Welcome to the next level. Welcome to the awakening.
Welcome back to episode 64 of the RunToGold.com podcast. This is an interview I did with Andy Sutton over at Contrary Investors Cafe, and boy is it fiery, so have some fun.
Over the past 25 years or so, Ron Paul has been one of the biggest advocates that the American people have had in Congress, whether it's fighting for free markets, fighting for honesty in monetary policy, or leading a movement to try to expose the Federal Reserve's balance sheet and books to public scrutiny. Ron Paul has been one of the leaders in this movement. And joining us today to discuss in more detail this movement is Trace Mayer. Trace, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to have you back here. You wrote an article about this. Why don't you give the audience here a gist of what your article was about, and tell us what's going on some of these fronts.
Yeah, that'd be great. In December of last year, Representative Ron Paul introduced House Resolution 4248, which is the Free Competition in Currency Act of 2009. And what this act does is it repeals federal laws, which federal legal tender laws. It'll prohibit federal taxes on gold, silver, platinum, palladium, or rhodium bullion. It'll prohibit states from assessing taxes or fees on any currency or monetary instrument that's used in interstate commerce or in foreign commerce. And it'll also repeal any federal criminal codes pertaining to gold, silver, or these other metallic coins. And any previous convictions, for example, the Kayer case, those will all be nullified. So this is perhaps the most ambitious legislation that Ron Paul has introduced, and he's introduced a couple of doozers. And to really fully understand the nature of it, we kind of have to take a journey through American legal history, and that's what I've done in the article that I wrote. I've applied some of my legal background and some of my studies in American legal history to show just where we've gone as the United States as we've journeyed through our monetary law and where this could potentially lead us.
So basically what we've got right now as it stands without his legislation is a situation where in many states, I'm not sure about all states, but I know here in Pennsylvania, if you want to sell precious metals, you're required to fill out paperwork. There's the anti-money laundering provisions that are applied to people that buy large quantities of precious metals from the public. Will this repeal those anti-money laundering rules as well?
Well, those would be state law issues in a lot of cases. But if there are federal code that's applicable, so if there's federal anti-money laundering, or for example the FinCEN or gold bullion dealers are subject to certain regulations under FinCEN, then it appears that this act would repeal a lot of that. And then if you're talking about criminal penalties for taxes, for example, a sales tax on gold. California is a good example. Any purchases under $1,000, you're subject to like the 10% state sales tax. Those types of taxes would be prohibited by the states from assessing on these instruments because they would become monetary instruments, kind of like you can't assess a sales tax on euros or yen or nickels,
Yeah, just to kind of frame this for the folks that are listening in, it's kind of like if you go to the bank and have a $100 bill and exchange it for 20s, that they would be able to levy a tax against you for that. I mean, that's how ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
tax in gold and silver is.
And that is absolutely ridiculous. If you I put in my dollar bill and get 4 quarters, but I need to pay a tax on that. But actually, this is ridiculous because we have that type of a tax currently being imposed on our currency that we use in ordinary daily transactions. And I've written about this before, and I wrote about it in this article. The Mint has introduced currency controls. So if you try to take over $5 of pennies or nickels across the border to Mexico to export, to melt, for example, then you could go to jail for 5 years or have a $10,000 fine or both. So we've already got these types of asinine taxes on our currency. I mean, who owns those pennies and nickels? Do you own them or do the government own them? And if you own them, then you should be able to melt them, right? But the mint, they're saying, well, you can't even melt your pennies and nickels. So we've got these just ridiculous tax laws and regulations on our currency right now. And so what this act would do is it would get rid of all of the stupid type of things that are coming out, because obviously if they weren't engaged in quantitative easing, then the pennies and nickels wouldn't be losing their value like they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes back to the point, and it should drive the point home to people that are taking in this information, that money really doesn't, as viewed by the government now, really doesn't belong to the people. It belongs to the government and the Federal Reserve, and it's merely on loan to us. And that's why you're not allowed to deface it, or as they would call it, or melt it. And I believe that really underscores that whole thing. If that's really your possession, and the copper is worth more, or the zinc or the nickel or whatever is worth more as a metal than it is as a monetary coin because of quantitative easing and other abuses, then you ought to be able to melt it down and sell it across the border if you want to, because it's yours. But they don't really look at it that way.
Yeah, and the Latin American governments are famous for this. Chile, for example, has plastic coinage because it's not even worth what they can't have seigniorage. Seigniorage is the term that we'd use here. They can't have seigniorage on their currency because they print it too fast, and we're starting to see that here. The government doesn't really have the seigniorage ability on their pennies and nickels, and so they're resorting to these violent, aggressive tactics. And last year they implemented a new law about pennies being mostly made of steel instead of copper or even zinc. So, that's ridiculousness too.
Well, yeah, it's kind of going back to like what they did during World War II when they were making them out of tin, I guess it was at the time, because, well, obviously they needed, the copper for more strategic reasons. Now they're just doing it because of, this idea that, they might give us plastic money. Who knows? That seems to be the gist of this. Well, let me ask you this. Now, Ron Paul has introduced this bill, and like I said in the intro, he's been a real champion of the rights of people, especially in the monetary arena. He's one of the few guys, I think, that really understands what's going on here with the Federal Reserve and with the dollar and inflation and all of these other types of things. Does he have any support on this from other members of Congress, or is he kind of standing alone as usual?
Well, I talked about that. I was like, right now he's the lone voice in the wilderness on H.R. 4248. But, keep in mind, he introduced H.R. 1207 just a year ago, and that's the Audit the Fed bill. And now he's got 317 co-sponsors. Wow. Everybody laughed at him when he introduced the bill. Oh, you're going to audit the Fed. That's ridiculous. Who do you think you are? But now it's just steamrolling in the political scene. And so likewise, he may not have very much support right now, but at the rate at which ideas spread and the pressure that people can put on their local politicians by going down to the local meetings and participating, we could very well see quite a bit of support come up for this act. I don't think it'll necessarily come up until people really start trying to use gold and silver in their ordinary daily transactions. Sure. But it's still there, and the more they debase and make worse the Federal Reserve note currency, the more attractive the alternative substitute competing currencies become. And so getting rid of those barriers to entry to that currency market would be great. Getting rid of these legal tender laws and these tax provisions, 28% rate gain tax on capital gains for precious metals. Getting rid of those would be a great boon for allowing them to compete against these little colored coupons that the Federal Reserve issues.
Well, now that's where I want to go next. The Fed has been extremely proficient, if at nothing else, over the years, at stonewalling and maintaining this wall of secrecy as to what it is exactly they do. And all you have to do is spend a few hours watching C-SPAN anytime Bernanke goes up to Capitol Hill to testify about anything. Somebody's going to ask a question that he doesn't want to answer, and he tells them to go pound salt, and he gets away with it.
Well, it used to.
Saying, hey, why don't we arrest this guy and then throw him in a jail cell until he decides to be a little bit more forthcoming? Do you think that these guys are going to allow an audit of any significant merit to actually take place?
Well, Ben Bernanke was severely wounded with the 70-30 vote in the Senate on his reconfirmation. The Fed is rapidly losing its legitimacy. You know, it didn't even have any legitimacy. It just sulked around in the shadows like a vampire. But now that it's getting, dragged out into the sun, it's having a tough time. And that's what's great about this is, right in my article, I explain exactly what the Fed's doing. And I even use Ben Bernanke's own words to do it. And Ron Paul, he says, the founding fathers would be ashamed with what we're putting up with. And you said, why don't we arrest Ben Bernanke? Well, let's see what the founding fathers had to say about this. Okay, Ben Bernanke, he said, quote, like gold, U.S. dollars have value only to the extent that they are strictly limited in supply. But the U.S. government has a technology called a printing press, or today its electronic equivalent, that allows it to produce as many U.S. dollars as it wishes at essentially no cost. By increasing the number of U.S. dollars in circulation, or even by credibly threatening to do so, the U.S. government can reduce the value of the dollar in terms of goods and services. Okay, so that's what Ben Bernanke said. Now, are you familiar with the 1792 Coinage Act by chance, Andy?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is great. So this is what the founding fathers wrote in. So Ben Bernanke says, well, we can produce as many U.S. dollars as we want at no cost. So what did the founding fathers say? Well, in Section 19, and this was actual valid law in the United States, okay? Like, we're not talking about hypotheticals here. This was actual enacted law. Section 19, it reads that if any of the gold or silver coins which shall be struck or coined at the said mint shall be debased or made worse as to the proportion of fine gold or fine silver therein contained, or shall be of less weight or value than the same ought to be pursuant to the directions of this act, through the default or with the connivance of any of the officers or persons who shall be employed at the said mint, for the purpose of profit or gain, or otherwise with a fraudulent intent, and if any of the said officers or persons shall embezzle any of the metals, which shall at the time be committed to their charge for the purpose of being coined, or any of the coins which shall be struck or coined at the said mint, every such officer or person who shall commit any or either of the said offenses shall be deemed guilty of felony and shall suffer death.
Yep.
Okay? So this was actual valid enacted law here in the United States. So, when you say arrest him and throw him in jail, man, you're getting a little soft.
I know. Well, in today's context, given with the progression of things and what these guys have been able to get away with, it would be somewhat of a jaded victory, if nothing else, for the people if he were to spend a night in jail. But yeah, I mean, that was total. The founding fathers, they took this issue very seriously, and obviously a felony punishable by death is evidence of that.
Yeah, to kind of follow up on that point is, some people might say, oh, well, that's 200 years ago. We shouldn't be doing that today. Well, 8th of December 2009, so just a month ago, Reuters reported that Yan Yanming, Chinese guy, was sentenced to death in late 2005 and took the secret of the whereabouts of 9.52 million of the misappropriated funds to his grave. The report added that Yang was the first person working in China's securities sector to be executed. Conscious that the growing gap between rich and poor could generate resentment, China is battling corruption and stock trading abuses. It has used the death penalty as a deterrent in serious cases. So, if these bankers and if the Federal Reserve and these officials, if they were deterred from their quantitative easing with the death penalty instead of getting bailed out, then we would have a lot more changes going on in our economy for the better, because we wouldn't have all of this moral hazard, and we wouldn't be socializing the losses while privatizing the gains, with connivance, stealing everybody's retirement funds. So, I think that we might see some return to this type of populist sentiment.
Well, I think I couldn't be compelled to disagree with you on that. I mean, I think if there was a time in really recent history that the mindset of the people has been more attuned to this kind of a situation, I think you've got it right now. Obviously, the market crashes and the bailouts and all the shenanigans and connivance that have gone on over the past couple of years have really generated a fair amount of outrage with the people. I want to get back to this issue with the Fed, though. What do you think it will take? I mean, obviously, we've got Ron Paul's bill, 1207, has a huge amount of co-sponsors. Obviously, they're going to vote yes for it. It's got enough votes to pass. I mean, that's a no-brainer. The Senate may be a bit different story. Who knows what the White House would do with it, if they'd be able to get a veto-proof vote, in the Senate. I mean, all those questions remain to be answered. But obviously, there's impetus to go forward and do this. What amount of leverage do you think? I mean, obviously, the Fed's losing credibility with people and the American population. How much leverage do you think they still have within the government to prevent this from going through? And if they would say, hey, all right, yeah, we'll let you audit, but we're only going to let you look at this, and the other thing. How much influence do you think they still have there?
Well, they've got a lot, and they've bought a lot of politicians. However, with the Scott Brown victory in Massachusetts, we're seeing the political winds change, and we're seeing people, they're starting to get a wake-up call, because 2010 is an election year, and I don't really think we're going to see much, even in 2010, 2012, but watch for 2016. 2016 is going to be an explosive year politically, because we're going to be in the depths of this Greater Depression, and what we're going to see is we're going to see 78 million baby boomers going up against 112 million millennials. And the millennials, who all voted in Obama, are going to be living through this economic misery that he's brought on them, and they're going to be watching YouTubes of Peter Schiff was right. And they're going to be like, well, we need some new ideas, because these old ones definitely aren't working. And so I think we're going to, I think that the tides are turning politically, and it's kind of a generational thing. It's going to take probably a few more years before we see any real substantive stuff happening. But that's definitely the trend that it's going towards.
You know what? I want to throw a caveat out there and see what you think about this. We definitely live, especially the millennials, the younger generations, they're very instant gratification oriented. The older folks are not so much so, but the older folks still have the traditional financial values and economic values to a certain extent. Do you think, I mean, obviously, look at what happened. Just in the course of a year, we had this huge, momentous shift, and we got rid of the Bush era, and we voted in all this change, and in just a year's time, we're already starting to throw it away. The Jersey election at the gubernatorial level, they got rid of Corzine. The Virginia election, and now up here in Massachusetts. I mean, Trace, think about this. 10 years ago, would have anybody said it was possible for anybody other than a left-leaning liberal Democrat win Ted Kennedy's Senate seat?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and not to say that Scott Brown's any saint, and Bush is, and Obama's just Bush on steroids. But what we're seeing is the government is going all in on Franklin Roosevelt's system. They're going all in. And they're going to lose, because the market's stronger than the government is, the individual collectively. And so they're going all in with these bailouts. They're trying to save these massive legacy businesses. And as their voting bloc continues to decline and go into their states of dementia and other drug-induced comas, we're going to see the younger generation who's getting taxed to death and will never see a single penny of it. They're never going to see any of the retirement, Social Security retirement promises. They're going to get fed up with it. They are getting fed up with it, and they're voting. They're starting to vote for a change in the system. And so political stuff, sometimes it explodes into a revolution, but usually those things brew for decades. And it was James Otis back in 1764 who preached against the writs of assistance and the Stamp Act. And that's and John Adams, he says it was then and there that the child of independence was born. But it didn't grow up until 1776. It took another 12 years for it to grow up. And so, sure, we've got blogs that are kind of like our pamphleteers that are spreading the ideas, but all of this stuff is kind of festering under the surface. And I think it's going to be, 2012, we're going to see more shocks in the political establishment, but 2016, it's going to get crazy. And another aspect of this is just the rate at which technology is moving. Because, 2008, Obama gets swept into the White House. Well, 2004, you didn't even have YouTube, And now we've got YouTube of Obama prancing around saying that he's going to end the war in Iraq. And then we got a YouTube right after it that says that he's going to send 30,000 more troops. And so
the old political, model, if you will, of lie today and then deny tomorrow. That doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
because there's always 100 bloggers and 100 people with video clips that are going to throw stuff up on YouTube and just make a total joker out of you if you try and do that stuff.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you what, it's not just Obama. I mean, you take Bush, any of these guys, they have just been decimated by back to back to back, little montages, if you will, of video and audio of them saying one thing one day and then saying the total opposite. And I don't know. I mean, I think you're right in that it does take time for revolutions, whether they be of ideas or otherwise, to foment. But I see this as being accelerated in this case, just because of we're such a now society, and all these technological innovations. Do you see that bringing this thing the whole to a head a lot sooner? I mean, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 2016 is really not that far away in the grand scheme of things.
No, it's not.
We're talking 6 years, and we're talking about the kind of the sweeping away of FDR's entire New Deal that's just embedded itself through unions and through all these legacy businesses. I mean, that's going to be a lot of pain. And, Americans don't really vote for pain very often, but the pain's coming down the pipeline. There's no real way to avoid it, and the sooner we get on with this liquidation and credit contraction, the better off we'll be. But, of course, we got the special interests that are going to be fighting against it. But I think we're seeing it happen a lot faster than anyone probably thought possible, and a lot of that's due to our technological advances.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I just found it to be totally amazing just what's really happened in the last year, not even just politically, but economically.
I'd like it to happen sooner, but if you were to have me bet money on it, I probably wouldn't because it's you're trying to marshal 400 million people almost in the U.S. and it's kind of hard to herd that many cats.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of inertia also that has to be overcome before anything gets going. Well, let's get back to Ron Paul as we start to wrap up here. He's got 2 bills now. One he's got a huge amount of support for, and that's to put some transparency behind the Federal Reserve. I mean, ultimately the goal is to get rid of it. But I think Ron Paul's a smart guy, and he knows that first what you have to do is lay bare the crimes, and I'm not going to mince words, the crimes that these people have committed over the generations. And once you've been able to lay bare what they've done, then it'll be a lot easier to get people behind the idea of getting rid of it and restoring the monetary authority to the Congress where it rightly belongs, as the Constitution dictates.
Yeah, I don't think it's Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, the Federal Reserve. They've got themselves a PR mess right now, and And it's great because, just grab them by the throat and drag them out of the shadows, and where appropriate, execute in the sense of get rid of their banking licenses or things like that. I'm never one for physical violence, but that's not to say that there aren't other people who are, and I'd hate to see a return to something barbaric like the French Revolution, but the impetus for that was John Law getting the king to say if anyone used gold and silver, it was punishable by death. And so what did the French do? Well, in self-defense, they executed the reign of terror and got rid of all the bankers and politicians. So they did it in self-defense. And so what are our bankers and politicians doing now? They're saying, well, no one can use nickels and pennies, and if you do, we're going to throw you in jail. Well, this has never ended well. And
you know what the nice thing is, though, Trace, with the creation of the corporate entity, we actually can perform an execution without shedding any blood. If we were to execute the corporate entity known as Goldman Sachs, we could get rid of them, and imprison some people, maybe, for crimes. I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, there's been legitimate crimes committed against the American people, whether it be monetary or otherwise.
You can't. Goldman Sachs, they're paying out bonuses. You can't pay out bonuses from stolen bailout funds that are equivalent to the lifetime earnings of 200,000 people, and do that in a single year, and not expect them to be upset.
When not call it a crime.
Yeah, well, it's a crime, and when you steal the equivalent of 200,000 working people's lifetime wages, you can't expect them to be happy about it. They're going to be pissed. And what are they going to do? They're going to seek retribution, because when you, as Gerald Celente says, when you've lost everything and you have nothing left to lose, you'll lose it. And I wouldn't be surprised if these vampire squids at Goldman Sachs start getting hunted by people who have lost everything. And
they did issue themselves firearms last.
Bloomberg was. I like that Bloomberg article, and it was interesting. I wrote an article about that. How the tensions are really up at Goldman Sachs, and I was like, this is a bad problem for them, because how's that going to affect earnings? Because that's what I care about. How can I got to use the same judgment Goldman Sachs does. Well, interestingly, I found a website that was a little bit more vehement than I was, and they'd gone and they'd gotten a whole bunch of pictures of people who had worked at Goldman Sachs. They got their pictures, they got all the people in their households, they got their home addresses, they got the cars they drive, and they've posted all this right on the internet, which is great because I'm a staunch advocate of the freedom of speech. But, if I were on that list...
I wouldn't want to be on that list.
I wouldn't want to be on that list either. And yet that's what Goldman Sachs has done. They've pissed off a lot of people, and, they're starting to try and engage in a life hedge by buying themselves concealed weapons permits, but a 50 caliber sniper rifle or a switchblade or something, these people aren't safe anywhere. And you have that instance up in Seattle where one guy walked into a coffee shop and took out 4 cops that were all sitting there having coffee. So if somebody wants to come and get you, it's the cost to provide security and protect yourself against those types of events on a regular basis is just so expensive. And so the best course of action is leave other people alone and don't touch their stuff. Don't screw people, don't steal their money, and definitely don't do it on a worldwide scale. Don't steal from billions of people. That's pretty good advice. And unfortunately, these rabid vampire squids didn't figure that out.
That'd be so annoying about our media is that they kind of make it not against the against the social order to even talk about this kind of stuff. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that people are angry. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that people have been screwed. You're not allowed to use that word. You're not allowed to say that because that's just verboten now, and I think that's wrong.
Yeah, well,
people are mad, and they should be allowed to stand and say, you know what, I am mad. I've had enough of this nonsense.
Well, look at the Nielsen ratings for CNBC. You've got 52% decline year over year of their audience, and of the people who are actually got the TV turned on, 40% of them have a laptop. And they're surfing their favorite blog. And what's their favorite blog talking about? Well, it's talking about reintroducing Section 19 of the 1792 Coinage Act for these vampire squids. So, you can talk about whatever that media is, but they're an old dying order also. And they're being replaced by a new form of media. And the new form of media is not happy about, most of the people writing in the new form of media are not happy about what these vampire squids and Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve have been doing. And a lot of them aren't afraid to talk about it. And so there's a great Mises quote, violence and force are impotent against the power of ideas. Ideas can only be overcome by other ideas. And at the end of the day, what Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve are doing is they're stealing from millions and billions of people.
Yeah, it's
and they're doing it with violence and aggression and coercion, and under color of law, strutting around in their cute little costumes with their hired thugs who are government officials. And you can't do that because the ideas are inferior. And this is the problem that they're having, is they're trying to fight with inferior ideas, and they're losing.
They're trying to sell legalized theft, and the people aren't buying anymore. And it's like you said, they're losing the war of ideas, and you can't battle that with force, at least not in the long run.
Yeah, ideas are bulletproof.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Trace, as we wrap up here, why don't you spend a minute, give out your website, tell us some of the stuff that's going on there, and how people can follow these articles that you're writing on these subjects.
Oh, okay, yeah, you can just come to runtogold.com. That's where I write a lot of the articles, and I've actually got a new product in the works. We've just sent it. We've sent it to the publisher. It's going to be a new book. And actually, any of these Goldman Sachs vampire squids that are listening to this, they might want to buy it because the book's called How to Vanish, and it's all about personal privacy and financial privacy. And so it goes along with another blog I co-author with a whistleblower attorney, Bill Rounds, and also a privacy law expert. He and I, we went to law school together. And so we've come out with this new book all about personal and financial privacy called How to Vanish. And hopefully it'll be available in probably about 2 to 3 months. But it should be quite fun.
I'm going to be sure to pick up a copy of that. I can't wait to read about it. The privacy issue is something that's definitely intriguing in today's digital age and e-commerce age in particular. Well, listen, Trace, again, pleasure having you on the show. Enjoyable as always, and let's get together again in a few months here and talk again.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Hi, this is Jim Willie from the Hat Trick Letter, found on www.goldenjackass.com, and you are listening to Run to Gold.